My name is Austin Madrick. I'm Representative Walker's Chief of Staff. Sitting there in the red is Jack Lockhart, who is Senator Gillespie's Chief of Staff. Should you ever need to get in contact with either of our offices, we're probably the two you'll interact with, so I want to put the names with faces. Otherwise, we appreciate you coming out to hear a little bit of an update on the recent action that Senator Gillespie, Representative Walker, and the General Assembly have been taking this past spring during our spring session. So we'll start with a quick overview and then turn it over to a senator and representative. Some of the topics we'll be covering this evening include recent healthcare reforms, legislation passed to tackle the ongoing public safety and crime concerns. We'll go over our balanced budget for fiscal year 23 and the inflation relief plan. Some property tax reforms, everyone's favorite subject here in Illinois. And a couple other pieces of important legislation that Representative Walker and Senator Gillespie have been working on, at which point then we'll go to questions. That is my reminder to make the little housekeeping note. You were obviously given some note cards when you walked in. Should you have any questions now or throughout the program, feel free to write any of those questions down on there. We'll collect them as we start the Q&A portion, get through those first, and then given that we've got a smaller audience today, we'll probably just have a little bit of chit-chat and an open discussion with any other future questions you have. So with that, we'll hand it over to Senator Gillespie to talk about some healthcare reform.
I'm going to start off with nursing home reform. This is one of the big bills that we did this year. And the reason we did this is because we learned that of the 100 lowest staffed nursing homes in the country, 48 of them are in Illinois.
Oh.
I know. And we have been adding money to the Medicaid reimbursement to nursing homes specifically for staffing since 2016, and we're not seeing the staffing levels get better. So what we did this year is we changed the way we pay nursing homes so that their payment is aligned with them meeting targets for staffing. There's a federal metric called the STRIVE metric, which determines staffing levels based on the acuity needs of patients in your facility. And so those will fluctuate based on how severe your patient load is. And so what we're doing now under this new law is that no nursing home is going to get the staffing and bonus payment unless they're at least at 70% of STRIVE. And then they get an increased amount with every percentage point beyond that they go. So the goal is you're going to get more money when you staff to 100% or better of the STRIVE metric. Likewise for quality, we're linking their quality payment. Instead of just giving everybody payment to promote quality, we're linking it now to them achieving the federal star ratings that go 1 through 5, and you would have to get a 3 or above to get the quality incentive payment. So they now stand to earn more money the better they staff and the better they are in quality. In addition to that, we are increasing payment rates for our certified nursing assistants. They are the bulk of the staff in nursing homes, and there's a shortage of them today, particularly after the pandemic. And they're some of our lowest paid healthcare workers. So what we did in this is we added money to allow for incentive payments to CNAs based on their tenure. So the longer they stay, the more money they will earn. And that starts at an additional $150 an hour and goes up to $650 an hour. And then we also are adding at least $150 an hour for every promotional level they achieve. So when they become a lead CNA or a supervisor CNA, they will attain more money there as well. And then a really key point that we did in this legislation is requiring ownership transparency. Nursing homes will now have to disclose 100% of their ownership. The reason for that is that the for-profit nursing home sector is increasingly being dominated by private equity entities. And private equity are investing to earn profit. They're not investing to operate a nursing home. So they tend to put their money in, make their profit, and get out. So there's a lot of turnover in ownership. So now we're going to have full transparency on it so we can track it. And we suspect that we will find that some of the places where we have lower quality levels or lower staffing levels are going to be the ones where private equity is involved. And then finally, we're moving from a resource utilization payment model for the base payments to a patient-driven payment model, which means their base payments are going to be linked to the level of care each of their patients is receiving. And so that is going to help us stop the overbilling that was happening with some nursing homes by claiming to give a higher level of mostly rehab services than what they were actually delivering. So all of this is going to help us drive better quality in nursing homes and to have a more accountability in the nursing home amongst the ownership. This model, I don't know if you heard President Biden in his State of the Union message, he talked about doing nursing home reform at the federal level. After we pass this, the Federal Office of CMS, Center for Medicaid Services, they came to Chicago and had a panel discussion with us. They're going to use our law as the model for what they're going to do at the federal level. We also focused on Medicaid expansion. One of the things that I do in the General Assembly is I am the Senate lead on the Medicaid Working Group, which is a bicameral, bipartisan group of legislators from the Senate and the House that focus on Medicaid issues every year. What we did this year was we looked at how we can, the governor had done a feasibility study to determine how we best can cover the 900,000 Illinoisans that do not currently have health care coverage. And what we found in looking at that feasibility study is the biggest percentage of that 900,000, over a third of that number, are people that already qualify for Medicaid but are not enrolled in Medicaid. So we wanted to understand how can we better keep people on the Medicaid rolls when they qualify for it. So we focused on getting rid of a lot of the bureaucratic hang-ups. So this is going to be helpful for anybody that's in a nursing home. Medicaid pays 70% of nursing home costs in the state, and anybody who is just on regular Medicaid. By allowing for continuous coverage, so right now you have to reestablish every month that your income levels meet the Medicaid income levels. Well, if you're in a long-term care facility and you're retired, you've already done your spend down, your income level isn't going to change, right? So why do you have to keep proving it every month? And likewise, if you're in a job where your wages fluctuate because you're an hourly worker and it may go up a little bit one month and then down the next month, that means you're coming on and off coverage. It costs the state between $400 and $600 to keep disenrolling and re-enrolling people. So just by doing these changes, allowing for 12 months of continuous coverage, allowing for the automatic re-enrollment for those who have zero income that we can determine from the Department of Revenue, and whether they've applied for food stamps. And then some of the other administrative things we did, we're going to end up saving the state money. So even though we're providing for continuous coverage, because of the costs of administratively taking people on and off, we're actually saving the state money by doing this. And we're making sure people have continuous coverage. We are also creating a Cna Intern Program under this bill. So as I mentioned, there's a real shortage of CNAs. So we've now established an intern program where they can work in nursing facilities, have Medicaid reimburse for their time, and earn some money while they're doing it, and have some things that'll go towards the credit on their schoolwork. And then finally, we increased the spousal allowance. So right now, if you're a married couple and one spouse is in a nursing home, the other spouse has a limited amount of money that they're allowed to retain in order to maintain their housing and living expenses outside of the nursing home. The problem is Illinois had not been keeping up with what the federal maximum was under Medicare. So we've got over 10 years to catch up to where the federal level is. So the base is now going to be $109,560 that a spouse can keep to maintain for living expenses, and that's going to increase by $2,700 each year from 2024 to 2034. And then we will finally be at the federal level. So it was a little bit too big of a hit to do it all at once. But we're going to start doing it, and it's baked into the budgets for the next 10 years. So that is definitely going to go up. Okay, next, have you ever been in a hospital for a procedure and you got discharged, and then all of a sudden you get a bill from some provider that A, you didn't know was even a provider, like the anesthesiologist or billing separately, and then B, they turn out not to be in your plan, so it's an out-of-network provider, and you're being billed at a way larger amount than what your normal would be. We're going to stop this with this bill. This is the No Surprises Billing Act, means that from now on, if that happens, that out-of-network provider, your insurance company has to treat that out-of-network provider as an in-network provider. So your copay and your deductible will apply normally and not as if it were a non-participating provider. So that's going to save us all money. So now I want to go into public safety a little bit, and I'm going to kick us off on that, and then Representative Walker's going to finish it up. So one of the things we've been seeing more of lately is vehicle thefts. And likewise, we've seen catalytic converter thefts. I'm sure if you are on the neighbors' pages at all, you're always hearing about somebody getting their catalytic converter stolen. Well, what they're doing with those is they're selling them for the metals, okay? And then the cars, they're just stealing the cars. And so what we're trying to do is to go after the technology that allows them to get into your car and going after the market where they sell the catalytic converters, because if you can cut off the profit out of it, then they're less likely to do it, right? It's already a crime to steal it, but now we're going to cut off the market as well. So the theft that allows them to steal cars is there is a new RFID receiver device that allows someone to pick up the radio signals coming out of your key fob for your car and allows them to open your car and start it even if your fob is inside your house and your car's in your garage. So this is going to allow, we're now declaring that RFID interceptor tool as a burglary tool. And so now just possession of that, if you're anything other than a locksmith and you possess that, that is now going to be a potential crime as a burglary tool. And then the catalytic converter, what we're doing is we're requiring metal dealers, recyclable metal dealers, if they're purchasing a catalytic converter for over $100, they have to keep record-keeping requirements. They have to identify the individual seller by name and address and with a photo, so that we'll be able to track these folks down and cut it off at the source. The next one is organized retail crime. And likewise with this one, we're going to go after trying to start the market as well. So in organized retail crime, these are the smash and grabs that you've heard about at the different malls. They are organized with a kingpin, for lack of a better phrase, that is coordinating a bunch of oftentimes young kids who get caught up in these rings. And this organizer is the one doing it. The organizer then gets the goods and sells them on the internet. So like we did with the catalytic converters, we are putting provisions on, and this was a joint project by the Sheriff's Association, the Attorney General, and the Illinois Retail Merchants Association. And we're on online marketplaces like eBay and Craigslist and things like that. We're requiring that they verify a high-volume third-party seller by their bank account number and their contact information, so we can trace where the money's going and we can identify the individuals involved.
So thank you all for coming out. It's good to get back together with groups of people. We haven't done this in a couple of years. I want to step back and just say a couple of things about where we are. We had an abbreviated session because we were faced with all kinds of difficulties because of COVID and because of finances and because of the change in the census that we had to do mapping. So we had to change the schedule of the election, caused us to change our agenda schedule, and it caused us to have to do about 5 months work in about 3.5 months. So we focused on what we believed the environment was telling us were the most important issues, which is why we're talking about what we're talking about. Healthcare, fiscal issues, including the pension, public safety, all things that have come to us as critical. And the approach we took, and at least speaking for Senator Gillespie and myself, we both come from the corporate world. Senator Gillespie is, if I can say so, an exceptionally talented operations manager of the sort we don't have anyone else in the legislature. And I come from the finance world, and so I tend to look at the financial challenges of the state for the long term. And one of the things we do as operations managers, we try and get to the core issues as opposed to the surface issues that bubble up every day and drive us crazy on the news. So that's why, for instance, when we're looking at retail theft, we try and get to the kingpin and we try and cut off the ability to make money while you're doing it. Same thing with catalytic converters. Same thing with guns. We have a very difficult gun violence problem in this market and certainly in the country. Part of it is because of the proliferation of guns, and part of that is because we have lost, in many cases, the ability to control who appropriately has a gun, and the ability to take away guns from people that don't have them, the ability to track straw purchases, the ability to link guns to crimes. Because while we want to protect the rights of gun owners, we certainly don't want to have guns be a driver of crime and a driver of death. So when we look at gun safety, we decided to focus on a study of gun safety that has to do with public health. It turns out that one of the things about gun safety in this country that really stunned me was that it's a leading cause of accidental death among children. Guns. Never was before. And that's because we have such a proliferation and such a lack of control. So we decided to look at the whole issues of gun safety through the Illinois Department of Public Health to study what we could do about storage, about tracking, about gun locks, about identification, all the options that are available, and have a balance in that world. One of the things we looked at, and I must say, the Senator and I are covering some of the bills we personally worked on. There are 260 odd bills going to be signed into law, so we're only going to hit some. It bans the sale and possession of untraceable ghost guns. This bill was signed yesterday. You might have seen it in the paper. These are guns that are produced in such a way, often with 3D printers now, with some plastic components, such that they can be effective guns, produced cheaply. The plans are on the internet, driving these machines, and they can be produced without a formal traditional manufacturer involved, and therefore no gun registration and no trackable number. So we can't track the ownership of a gun to a crime. One of the scary things in this world is that about 40% of the guns that are confiscated by the Chicago cops, due to a serious crime, gun-related crime, about 40% come from about 3 gun shops, two of which are in the suburbs, and the third one is in northern Indiana. And so the control of those sales and the tracking of the ownership of that is critical. So we passed a bill that requires these ghost guns, as they're called, to be serialized, i.e. we set up a system whereby there's special federally set up registration and serial numbers for these guns that don't have them, and you're required, if you own one, to get the number and have it etched on the gun in a way that is difficult to change, at least, and it has to be done, and so that we can track it. This is, as usual, the position, well, if you're a legal owner of one of these, there's a way for you to be legal, but if you don't do this, if you don't follow that way, then the gun de facto becomes illegal and your ownership becomes illegal. So that's tracking guns. Again, another case, and we have many of these, we could go on and on, where the federal government is likely to follow the law that Illinois first does. We've done that in all kinds of arenas, and we continue to do that. It's one of the reasons, as years go by, I get more and more proud of Illinois. Guns and the gun storage campaign, I think I covered that a bit. It's in concert with responsible gun ownership, and this gun storage and gun protection, having a gun safe when you're transported, having a trigger guard, these are all things ironically, that the NRA used to support. It used to be part of their program. And over the past 15 years, they as an organization have changed so dramatically that all of a sudden they're against all these things, which used to be considered common sense even by the gun associations, ISRA and NRA. So we're going to push that. Another thing we're doing, we for 35 years have been tough on crime as our primary conceptual strategy on what to do with crime. And therefore, built up police departments, built up armaments, built up training to be military-like training, invested in that kind of thing, got such things as armored personnel carriers from the military into police departments, and had a whole long period of extending penalties such that we have one of the highest per capita populations of our own citizens in jail. And so there are some benefits obviously, but for the most part, I think the whole idea of getting frightened about what's happening and getting tough on crime, quote unquote, is actually going to a failed strategy. You'll hear a lot of people say that the policing reform bills we passed 2 years ago called the Safety Act is linked to an increase in crime over the past 2 years. Well, just so you all know, most of the bill that people are quoting saying caused those increases in crime, well, the increases in crime occurred before the bill was passed. And the increases in crime that are occurring now, most of that bill, those pieces people complain about, aren't even effective now. They're effective January 1st, 2023. So the whole link, that bill all of a sudden caused crime to go up, which is a political meme, is just pure nonsense. The crime is going up. So the question for us is, as people who want to fix, do we focus on the causes and the core processes, or do we focus on a failed strategy called tough on crime? And so we decided to be smart on crime. And part of the things that we did was look at the various community efforts that actually have helped and can be demonstrated to have helped lower violent crime in certain neighborhoods, and invested $250 million into those. And into those interventions for youth, which include training, it includes after school and before school programs, it includes getting them linked up with apprenticeship programs for kids that are lost, getting them linked up with the old kinds of programs that we used to do with the police department, the police athletic league, that kind of thing. Those things worked, and we got away from them over time, and now we're going back to those. Expanding the interstate cameras to try and get a track on what's going on in terms of shootings on roadways. And then not only that, but to invest in and support body cams and the storage of data and the sharing of data between police departments. These are the kinds of things that actually police departments asked us to do. One of the things that is also interesting for us, and the senator and I were with the local police chief today. A lot of the things in this policing reform bill that we pushed forward a year and a half ago and is now starting to come into place were actually policies of police departments already. They just were, from my opinion, falling short on the training and the implementation. But they were considered rational and straightforward and not strange, not different than the responsible police chiefs wanted to do anyway. So we're pushing that. $12 million for witness protection and anonymous tip line. For communities where people are afraid to call the police because they have had some instances where they call the police and the police come and one of their own gets shot because the police are afraid to go into that situation, don't fully understand it, and are overarmed to begin with. Anonymous tip lines. The difficulty in our communities is all that has to happen is once, and 150 people hear about it, and then they each tell 10, and all of a sudden the whole relationship between the police and the community is lost. And so having an anonymous tip line where people can call without any perceived risk to themselves and help is something worthwhile. So we set up a separate system for that that is semi-independent of the 911 system. $70 million for domestic violence protection and response. One of the things we worked on, again, because police departments asked us to. Police hate going on domestic violence calls because they're naturally difficult, they're naturally complicated. It's hard at first to figure out who's saying what to whom and who's doing what to whom, and people are very emotional. And so we've shifted, especially with a bill that the senator sponsored, shifted some of the resources to pay for social workers in municipalities that can be assigned to the police department, as is done in the northwest suburbs, so that those kinds of calls, the police can go with a social worker, or it could, depending on the call and how dangerous it seems to be, the social worker can handle themselves. People that are trained in domestic violence, people that are trained in dealing with people with psychotic breaks, people that are trained in dealing with people that don't communicate. To move that off the standard police person's responsibility, because they're the most difficult calls and the calls that cause tragedy. And so police have very important things to do. Let's take the hardest calls or help them with their hardest calls. So we've invested new in alternative ways to do this. Now, we've got all kinds of political criticism about defunding the police. In fact, we have in this area, number one, the highest average police salary, and in Chicago, among large cities, one of the most number of police per capita. We've already done the tough on crime. We've already done the high funded police. What we're trying to do is, when we add funding to make their job easier and make them more focused, and add to their training so we can be smart on crime more than we're tough on crime. Finally, crime labs. We got to a position where we were 2 years behind and longer on DNA tests for identification, but especially for sex crimes. 2 years behind. That's just unacceptable. So we invested in doubling the capacity for crime labs in Illinois. And local police support. Some of this is in reaction to the policing reform bills we passed, but at the request of sheriff's departments and police chiefs and the state police, we decided to support some of the things that we asked for. What we don't want is unfunded mandates. So if we're going to require people to use body cameras, we have to support both the purchase of them and, what is more expensive, the ability to hold and retrieve the data that they capture. And it turns out to be. So we did that. Mental health screenings, many departments can do them. Other departments can't afford them. They don't have, so we're going to add support for that. Increased child care. First responders, and this of course goes for fire and police, first responders work off hours. And many of in our modern era, first responders are of both genders and have different roles in the family. And we decided to especially focus child care off hours. So the people that work nights can get child care or child coverage. The people that can work different shifts, especially for first responders, we can respond to their need there. The co-responder pilot program is one that is specifically focused on a given kinds of situations where the co-responder is in fact that social services or social worker person. And recruitment and retention grants. For a bunch of reasons, it's become more difficult lately to hire police. A lot of police feel like they're kind of under attack unfairly, and their job is stressful, there's no doubt about it. So we're investing in things like high school programs to interest people and inform them about the job, programs in community colleges where you can get certification that can lead to a policing career, and retention. So again, if we're going to get at public safety, and we need to, and the public wants us to, we're going to have to get to the root causes and the root solutions of public safety rather than just, throw everyone in jail and make the sentence longer, because that's a failed strategy, actually. and budget. So, I never thought I'd see the day, but we actually have turned the corner on pensions, which almost no one believes, but I've been looking at it for over 10 years. We reformed our pensions in Illinois in 2010, 2011 by moving to Tier 2 pensions from Tier 1. Tier 2 pensions actually do not have a substantial drain on the state's budget. If managed properly, because of the money that people put in versus the money they take out, they are either neutral or a net positive for our budget. And Tier 2 pensions were established for everyone hired in 2011 and beyond. Yeah,
Would you differentiate between the two? Where are they?
pardon me?
What is the difference between 1 and 2?
Oh, it's a matter of how much people put in versus how much they get out. That's simply it. It's a different financial model. The benefits of a Tier 2 pension actually are down around where Social Security is. And the former pensions were much higher than that. So if you can think about this, the elephant's gone through the snake. As people age and as people come in and out of the pension system for various reasons, we've now got to the point where we're halfway there where the whole thing is going to be neutral. We estimated in about 18 years. Because of the 2 downturns we've had since we've worked on this, it's going to be about 22 years, which was some people's initial projection that would occur. And we're about 11 years into it, and the pension analysts, third-party pension analysts, have said this year we're halfway through the turnaround on pensions in Illinois. So the plan is working. The problem from a political point of view is I run for 2 years, the senator often is in a 4-year term. No one wants to hear a 20-year plan. We do that in business, and we do that in strategic planning and in consulting, but not in politics. So for me to sell a 20-year plan is almost impossible politically, but in fact, we had a 20-year plan to fix pensions and we're halfway through and the signs are there. So let's get to the budget. We had a balanced budget. Again, every year that Pritzker's been governor, we've had a balanced budget. We've had an especially attractive budget this year in the outcome because we were very conservative in projecting the amount of money coming in because we didn't know how bad COVID would be in the economy. It turns out, primarily because of incentives from the federal level, not direct payments, but incentives that caused the economy to heat up, the tax revenues coming into the government are much ahead of where we were, and we ended up with a surplus. Not just a balanced budget, but a substantial surplus in Illinois this year. Now that's not going to always be the case, but the reason we had a surplus is we were very conservative in projecting costs. We were very conservative in spending, even though we had real demands in public health. We have a rainy day fund by law in Illinois that had all of $20,000 in it for years. It was like a dry hole in the desert. We now have put $1 billion into the rainy day fund, and actually there's going to be a little more. Hey, Nick. We're in a ramp up. It's called the Edgar ramp, and you can guess who that's about. We underpaid pensions historically from our budget, and it had a ramp that we're overpaying now from what an actuary would say we should. We're at the high end of the ramp. In addition to that overpayment to try and catch up on pensions, we added another $500 million in pension payments out of the budget, which saves us about $1.8 billion in interest costs, in benefits costs. Not that long ago, and I think it's probably 3.5 years ago, we had a $19 billion in accounts payable late. $19 billion. That is outrageous. We had some medical providers that hadn't been paid in 2 years by the state. Absolutely outrageous situation. So the critics of the state at that time were absolutely legit. And we've been paring that down. This year we have 0. We have no accounts payable now at this point over 12 days. when our goal is 30 days. We perform better fiscally than any Fortune 500 company in the country right now. And I know that because I come from that world. So that's been fantastic. The reason it's mostly fantastic is for most of those debts, most of those accounts payable, we had a 12% late payment penalty. And so we were paying upwards of over $100 million in late fees that we didn't have to pay. We just paid our bills on time. That $12 billion, well, it was, I'm thinking when it was 12, but 19 billion was its high point. It's now down to 0 in terms of accounts payable. We do more investments in education, and the reason we do that is because the more we invest in education, the less you have to pay in property tax. It's about 80% of your property tax bill. So we've been increasing investments in education every year for the past 3 years, and we did it again this year. And it's good for us because it's a smart thing to do fiscally, but not only that, we're doing it on a needs basis, like we're trying to do with healthcare, where it's based on the needs of students, regardless of where they live, and based on the needs of the school district. So we have tiers of school districts, some get more and some get less. It's a needs-based program. Evidence-based funding model. And then we added money for CTE, which is apprenticeship programs and training in technical trades. We might even build, we're going back to some successes of the past, we might even build a technical school in Chicago again. To go away for the people that really don't find their future in a 4-year college, to go to apprenticeship programs, training programs, programs in community colleges and high schools for the trades, for the kinds of things that won't be shipped to another country like plumbing, where people can make in 6 figures 2 years out of their training and have a job that's stable. And so that's been something we've been working on. Again, the apprenticeship program, the biggest apprenticeship program in Illinois, we're actually part of an effort that Senator Gillespie and I did 3 years ago. So, adult education, early childhood education, and MAP grants. We've known for a long time that the better you can prepare people who are before kindergarten for school, the better they're going to do in kindergarten and first grade and second grade and on. And so we decided to focus much more on very early childhood education and all the organizations that can do that. So that's where that's going. And then MAP grants, 20% increase. MAP grants are the ways people who can't afford to college can go to college without burdening themselves with significant student debt. And so, again, fiscally a very good year. Some of this, I admit, is because we got extra funding from the federal government, but not a lot went directly to the state. Most actually went to organizations and municipalities. But the heated up economic environment we have this year, which is driven entirely by demand side economics rather than supply side economics, has caused inflation, so that's something to be managed, but that's also caused a surplus in our budget. Paying down debt. We paid down the unemployment. One of the things that happened in the COVID is that a lot of families got money from unemployment insurance via a federal program and ours that said you can get this, even though you don't technically qualify in it for having worked a given number of hours for a provider of unemployment insurance. You as a family can still get this during this period. It's probably a good thing to do, but it left us with a hole in our unemployment insurance fund, which is supported by taxes to businesses. So we put $2.7 billion back into the unemployment insurance fund. We need a little more there to make it even, but that's a big piece. I was involved in these discussions. I thought $2 billion would be the fair number. We actually ended up putting in $2.7 billion. Primarily at the request of businesses and the Republican side of these negotiations. We had health providers for people who work in the state not paid for years. We paid that debt down. And College Illinois was a program where people could put money into the state treasurer, and the treasurer could manage that money into a fund, and you would get to apply that to a state school. It had been underfunded, so we caught it up. So we had a remarkably good year. So what do we do about inflation? So all of those budgeting things are kind of long-term. We have to manage by good cost control, and we're committed to doing that, as well as the right forecast of revenue. But what do you do about inflation, which is not driven primarily by anything the state does? It's driven by demand, which is driven by monetary policy. It's driven by supply, and it's driven by world events. And so what do? We can't do much about inflation, but we can have some relief. People will be getting checks later in this year. It's meant to be some relief for inflation. It suspends a portion of the grocery tax. The state takes a grocery tax. Food is very important to people. The prices are going up. So we've suspended for months the grocery tax that the state takes, and we're just not going to take it. Now, I admit that most people probably won't notice it on their bill, but it is actually a benefit, because I don't think people sort out who the city gets a tax and the county gets a tax and the state gets a tax. I don't think they sort it out, but the state's not taking that tax. Property tax for homeowners, a tax credit up to $300. Sales tax holiday for back to school. And especially one that is important to low-income people and earn income tax credit, where people that really don't have enough money to survive well in our society are going to get a tax break because of income tax credit, similar to what happens at the federal level. And finally, one that I find ironic, we find it fair to pay teachers a credit for the money they take out of their own pockets to buy books, pencils, paper for their own students, which I find to be shocking. But rather than try and fix that in a systemic way, we decided to just give teachers credit back. So at least for the short term, that's a little bit weird. And property tax. When we go door to door, before COVID, the number one thing people used to tell me to try and fix was property tax. Everyone thinks their property taxes are too high, and we have among the highest property taxes in the country. The challenge as a state legislator is the state doesn't levy property taxes. Some states do. Some states we get compared with, like Indiana, levy a county property tax, as does Milwaukee state property tax. Wisconsin, obviously. We don't. So they ask us to cut property taxes. Well, we don't take any property taxes, but we can set the playing field. We can set the rules when a taxing body has to go to the taxpayers to ask them whether or not they're allowed to raise a levy. We can change those rules. And that's what we worked on. PTEL is the law under which, at least for around here, and most of the state, about 85% of the state taxpayers, the law that sets when you have to go to the taxpayers to ask permission to raise a levy. That's what PTEL is. And it was set up in such a way that we discovered had kind of a perverse incentive. Like the military, or at least people talk about the military, the idea that people have in their minds, and I talk to a lot of local taxing body finance directors, is if I don't take the max this year, I won't be able to get to use it as a base for next year's calculation. Right? If you don't tax to the max this year, you don't get to whatever you might need next year, which I don't really know yet what it is. So we were in a pattern where all kinds of taxing districts were taxing to the max under PTEL, the max they could get without going to referendum, even if they didn't need the money. And we found among the wealthier sections of the state that a lot of taxing bodies had substantial reserves in the bank because of this, and because they might need it in the future that the public didn't even know about. I mean, obviously they were in reports somewhere, but the public doesn't have time to go look at the financial reports of taxing bodies. So we did two things. One is we changed the law such that no matter what you take this year, you can take what you need next year regardless of what you took this year. In other words, you don't get a penalty for not taking the max this year. You can go back to what you would have taken if you had taken the max in any of the previous 3 years. So to take away that incentive. Other thing we did was say to taxing bodies, when you apply for your levy, and everybody has to turn that into the county for the county to collect it for them. When you apply for your levy to the county, you have to disclose to the public how much you have in reserves. These two things work together because we have a special part of the law that says if you want to release your reserves, and some people literally have 2 years reserves. You want to release your reserves and give that money essentially back, even by check, to the taxpayer, or lower the property taxes for that year, that amount, then you don't get penalized for what you can calculate next year. So you can release that money into the system. So those are the two things that we worked on and got passed. There are a lot of other things that we could do to level the playing field a bit, but we're working on them, and they're real tricky because, again, it's not up to the state to levy property taxes. It's only up to the state to say when you have to go to referendum or how you can do the accounting or what you have to disclose. So that's what we worked on in property tax. Oh, similar to what the senator said in healthcare, there are a lot of things we caused people to do every year they really don't have to do. It's like we used to have to, and some of you may know this, we used to have to apply to get a senior exemption every year on our taxes. Well, we're not getting any younger. It's not like we're not going to be a senior next year. Once the tax system proved to us that they can track deaths and people moving out well enough, that we said, okay, you don't have to apply every year. We'll just assume you're there and you get the break without having to reapply. And so we did that for veterans. We did that for disabled people. Once you're seriously disabled enough to get a tax break, you're not going to get better all of a sudden. So we use that to remove a lot of the bureaucracy from taxpayers because we do trust our systems, and they had to demonstrate to us that they did work, that we wouldn't lose track of it. But we're going to have to audit it as well, of course. And a couple of other things we did. One that we're especially proud of actually made this past Sunday's Tribune, was a story about this bill. I think we all can recall in years past horrible stories about young people being drugged and sexually assaulted or raped. That became, actually it was a controversial issue at the time, but that became the law that if you're drugged by a perpetrator and sexually assaulted, that is clearly a crime. However you want to define that crime, what label you want to do, but it's a crime, and you can get convicted of it, and it has to be proven, but you can get convicted. Well, one of the misapplications of that law turns out that there was some confusion in the court system, and we have found that judges can be confused, that if you took the drug or the alcohol yourself as a young person, somehow that wasn't the same thing. Somehow the fact that you got raped is partly your fault. Well, this isn't a civil case, this is a criminal case. No one has any right to rape a person unconscious or unable to give consent to a sexual assault. No one has any right to do that and feel that they're free from prosecution. That's absurd. It's part of our history of blaming the woman, although there are victims of rape of both genders. So we passed that, and that just got signed into law. Well, did it? It made the Tribune, it has not been signed into law, but I'm sure the governor will do it. It passed virtually unanimously, if not unanimously, in the Senate and the House. And so we just have to keep chipping away at the traditional idea that it must have somehow been her fault. Remember, we used to actually say, I shouldn't go back in the day, we used to actually say there's some mitigating of a crime if a woman wore a skirt too short. What, I mean, to me, that's not, I mean, it was nonsense then and it's nonsense now. When a person's unconscious, they can't be raped, period. And so that's how we changed the law. And Austin was the primary champion of that law and worked really hard on it. So. And that, I believe I'm done with mine.
So, yeah, I want to thank Austin for championing that. You'll see if you read the Tribune story, a very brave young woman who served as an intern in our office for Representative Walker was the one that this happened to. And she wanted to come forward with her story and stop it from happening in the future. And she came down to Springfield and she testified. And was just remarkable. And there wasn't anybody in the General Assembly that wasn't on her side. She had so many people, older women, employees of the security guards that stopped her on the way out of the hearing rooms and told her their stories if it had happened to them or happened to somebody in their family, and thanking her so much for coming forward. And I'm just thrilled that I get to work with Representative Walker and Austin, and we do good things like this. So, one thing before I get into social workers that I just want to follow up on the educational funding and property taxes. So, Illinois historically underpaid its share of education expenses. In most states, the state pays roughly 50% of the cost of K through 12 education, kindergarten through high school. Illinois was at the 25 to 30% range. And so that's why our property taxes had gotten as high as they had. So in 2018, when we passed the evidence-based funding formula, the goal was to gradually increase what the state is paying to help alleviate the need for a further levying of property taxes. So since 2018, the state has paid a total of $5.87 billion in new money to our local schools. So we have been making good on our promise to do that. It's gotten to a fairly sizable amount. So now it's on us when we go to vote in local elections to make sure we're asking our local school boards, what are you levying? Why are you levying it? And that's why we wanted to make sure you had the information to do that by having information on their reserves and things like that. Social worker repayment. So in addition to certified nursing assistants, we have a shortage of social workers. And we heard how valuable they are in public safety roles. They're also extremely valuable in schools, particularly after the 2 years of home learning with COVID. What we're finding is students have a lot of social issues, mental health issues, unmet needs that are impacting their ability to learn. And so last year we passed legislation that enabled a scholarship for social workers who agreed to work in public school systems after the graduation, and loan repayment assistance after they had been working in the school system for at least a year. This year we expanded the loan repayment to include going to work for a municipality, so we can try to recruit more social workers to help with the public safety issues Rep. Walker was talking about, and we funded it. So there is now $6 million available in a pool statewide to fund the loan repayment and scholarship program, and each social worker can receive up to $6,500 in student loan assistance. So if you know anybody who is a social worker, a recent grad, still has loans to pay off, and they want to go to work for a school or a municipality, please let them know about this program. It's administered through the Illinois State Student Assistance Commission, the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. And Jack or Austin would be happy to help anybody undertake getting access to that funding. And then finally, school fee waivers. Coming out of the pandemic, and we had so many job losses during that, it really increased the level of homelessness that we're seeing in the state. People that had backlogs of rent that they couldn't pay, they got some relief on that when the federal government was providing some assistance. Those programs have expired, and so now we're seeing people that are losing their homes. What we wanted to make sure is that students weren't put at a disadvantage in their learning or their ability to participate in the full level of activities and programs that schools offer by virtue of the fact that they are homeless. So we implemented a school fee waiver for homeless students and requires school districts to have a stash of school textbooks and other materials that they can give to students that are homeless, so they can maintain their learning level while their family is getting back on their feet. So with that, we'd like to open it up for any questions that you may have.
Actually, very fitting to your last slide here. The question I have in front of me: what are you doing for the homeless? Okay, so that's one of the things we're doing. We also had, let's see, $150 million in affordable housing money that is going into fund a bill that we passed last year, an affordable housing omnibus, that I worked with Senators Hunter and Feigenholz on, and Representative Gazzardi and Ramirez on in the House. That we actually saw there was another story in the Tribune 2 Sundays ago, 2 or 3, I lose track, where that is actually being put to use. The first set of buildings is going up in Chicago under that affordable housing. What it does is, in exchange for the tax benefit that the developer gets, they agree to keep units of housing affordable for 30 years. So it's a long-term investment in affordability. We also did the school waiver program. We are working in the fall veto session. After the election, we go back for a couple of weeks, and we are working on a supplemental appropriation to do more for homelessness as we see how much this is growing as these federal programs start to end.
Yeah, let me just respond in a slightly different way. I was heavily involved with Journeys in Arlington Heights, which runs a PADS program. They're building a new facility. They broke ground about 2 weeks ago. A substantial amount of that funding is coming from the state through our office. It's a difficult problem, there's no doubt, but between tax incentives and the direct grants that we can give, we're starting to construct housing that can be associated with organizations that are working to get people into housing. And hopefully that works. I mean, to be honest, it's a problem that is really difficult to solve for a whole bunch of reasons. One of the reasons I'm attracted to the problem is that and got me involved in it, is I started seeing Iraqi war veterans homeless, just like Vietnam War veterans were homeless in my era. And I started meeting them in the parks, and I started finding where they sleep. And I found, turns out I found a lot of things that the local mayors and stuff didn't know. But there are all kinds of issues with that. One is the issue is, what do we do with people who were in group settings with mental difficulties when we close down those settings? Why is the biggest mental hospital in the state the Cook County Jail? That's a tragedy. We ought to be ashamed of it. So we have to work on the mental health side, we have to work on the nutrition side, we have to work on the actual housing side, and we have to work with organizations that are set up to deal with these in a serious way, in a face-to-face way. And we're making a little progress. But I was just reading today about the problems in San Diego. It's a tough problem. I mean, there's no denying it, but it is one of the priorities that we have, and one of the priorities the state is finally getting around to. When we gave this substantial money for the housing both locally and for the organizations like Journeys, their response to me was, no one ever thinks of us for this. Everybody else gets the big grants, but not us. Well, that's changed. That's changed as far as we're concerned. Thanks for your question.
And one last thing I would add, when we started working on the earned income tax credit expansion, we got data on where residents of Illinois by Senate district, how many were taking an earned income tax credit. Our Senate district out here and many others in the suburbs actually have higher levels of people who qualify, families who qualify for earned income than a lot of the city neighborhoods. There is a silent poverty problem in the suburbs that is growing. And that is why we take this so seriously and are trying so hard to support families as they come here.
Mr. Tibbetts.
I think I heard recently that the state's credit rating was increased from junk status to 1 tip above junk status. So if we've paid off all of our debts, why isn't it higher?
They wanted,
We've actually gone up. All 3 credit ratings have increased us twice now in the last year. So we're more than 1 step above junk status right now.
2 steps? I don't know
I think to answer your question, they're waiting to see if we can do it next year.
Yeah.
We're going to be good?
If we
If we're
sustain
going to
it.
do it next year,
Okay.
which we will.
Okay.
Because what people don't know, and they probably didn't look at closely enough, we held back a lot of the benefits we got in this current economy with federal support for next year, not this year. And if I have anything to do with it, we're going to be equally conservative on forecasting costs. So we should have a surplus next year, and we should get a higher credit rating again. We've never defaulted on a debt, so it's hard to judge what is that credit rating about. What its impact is to cause us to pay more interest on our bonds, and that's coming down now. Our bonds are it's like selling a house now. When we go to the market with our bonds, they're snapped up immediately, just immediately. There's not even it's like where they're sold in advance. They're that attractive because they know we're good for the money. Why they have the ratings they do, I'm not exactly sure. Let me just say one other thing. I'm starting, and I say this often, I'm starting to get proud of Illinois again, and I do it from a numbers point of view. For 10 years, I've been hearing from the likes of IPI and others that we were losing between 250,000 and 400,000 inhabitants, all going to other states. Everything's going down the drain and people are leaving. The final numbers came out today for the Senate, and it's not that we were down 250,000. It's not that we were even. We were actually up over 200,000 in population in the last 10 years in Illinois. So all this nonsense you hear about everything going down the tubes and everyone leaving, well, we have an aging population that has been going south for retirement since Carrier invented air conditioning. But on balance, we're doing pretty well. And it's just nonsense. I mean, not to justify anything good about Illinois if you're losing 500,000 in population. People, no, we gained 200,000 in population. They just made it up. It's one of the frustrations of this job. There's just so much strange information floating around that people take at face value.
So we are over 13 million people in Illinois for the first time. We've never been that high.
And everyone's not leaving. Although your neighbor might, because it's warmer there.
All right, we've got a couple more questions. The first one on nursing homes. The question is there a minimum number of beds that are required for nursing homes?
There's not a flat number of beds that's required. We have a certificate of need process. So nursing home facilities, like hospitals, have to present why they need a certain number of beds, and then they get approval or they don't get approval. We're actually overbedded in nursing homes based on the need across the state, but we've got pockets that are underbedded. You know, it's not consistent across the state. So It's something that the certificate of need process balances. And we're also trying to make a concerted effort to put more money into at-home care, so that making it possible for more people who want to stay at home to be able to stay at home. So the CNA Intern Program, the other things that we're doing through Medicaid directly that pays for those in-home services, the caregivers that disabled people that live at home, they're able to live on their own, but they need some help. We've been raising the rates there too to try to better enable people to stay at home who want to and are able to.
Just a quick follow-up to that. So just to ensure that the nursing homes are able to meet the requirement of staffing, my question was around that. Like, is there a minimum requirement of beds that you will ensure that a given nursing home has for that legislation or for that reform?
Level of staffing per bed?
Right.
Yes, there is. Although what we're doing with the federal, using the federal Strive metric, it's not based on just how many beds you have, it's based on how sick the patients are that are in those beds, okay? So if you've got patients that need, you could have a patient mix where you've got 25% that have severe rehabilitation need, so they're having 2 hours of rehab a day. You've got 30% that aren't getting any rehab. It's just maintenance kinds of things. And so your payment level, your staffing level is going to fluctuate. Your minimum staffing level will fluctuate based on your census at the time that we're measuring it. So we measure it quarterly, and your payment then is set for that quarter based on that. So it's a combination of bed and the need of the patient in those beds.
How are you keeping track of how responsible the nursing homes are to their patients?
So we have two mechanisms to do that. Prior to passing this reform bill, it was all done through public health inspections and a complaint process. There is a long-term care ombudsman in the Department of Aging that receives complaints and works with families, and those complaints then are funneled to public health to go in and do audits of nursing homes. They do routine audits on a periodic basis, but they also would do specific audits when complaints would come in. Problem was, particularly during COVID, the staffing wasn't there to be able to go in to the nursing homes because public health was fighting the COVID battle. And so there weren't enough of them happening. So in order to supplement, and the problem with an audit process is it's not as proactive as you'd like it to be, right? So by changing the payment system, what I wanted to do in this bill was to align the incentives. So now there's more of a financial incentive for a nursing home to do better on staffing because they're going to get more money if they do. And to do better on quality metrics because they're going to get more money if they do. They have to report, there's a thing called the cost report that the federal government requires for Medicare and Medicaid. And in that cost report is where we get the metrics that drive the star rating and where we get the staffing and ownership information that we need. So we'll be monitoring those reports. Public health will continue to do audits, but having the incentives aligned from a financial perspective is more prospective in trying to ensure quality because it now makes it's better for a nursing home to do more staffing because they'll actually get more money if they do and less money if they don't.
It makes sense. How do we find these ratings? How do we find these ratings?
They are published on the Department of Health and Family Services webpage. So if you go to Illinois, I don't remember the exact webpage site, but it is if you just Google the Illinois Department of HFS, Health and Family Services, it'll take you to their webpage, and they publish those statistics there.
We did have another question that came in regarding some of the discussion on revisiting some past public safety things that may have worked and now trying to revitalize those. Questions if we've been taking any steps to revisit neighborhood watch area programs.
Well, yes and no. We do support the concept, but they're mostly entirely driven locally. It's not something the state gets involved in. But I think they're certainly a good thing to do. There are dangers in having, here's what I fear, and this is just me. I'm starting to get somewhat concerned with calls I get with people that saying they're arming up to protect their neighborhood. That to me is amazing, just amazing for as safe as we are. And people think they're arming up, when in fact what they ought to do is being cooperative with their neighbors and working with their municipalities and their police departments to have safety. I hope that's not answering the question, but I hope that we go away from that fear. That fear is being driven by national messaging. I had a guy tell me on the phone, well, I said, what are you getting? And I'm a veteran, and so I know that these are weapons of war. What are you getting? And he told me, and I said, for what? To protect my property from those people coming from Chicago. Like where? I understand, I kind of get the fear, but I don't get the practicality of it. And I think it's a way overreaction, and I hope this goes away. I hope this goes away. And I don't want to dive in too much, but you know, we probably have 100 times the amount of guns that a reasonable society would have in the kind of society that we have and the kind of economy. Probably 100 times. And it's leading to kids losing their lives. It's leading to suicides. It's emergency doctors will tell you, I actually save a lot of potential suicides through drugs or through knives or through hangings or whatever, but you can't save a bullet suicide. And that's become a big public health issue. We have to do something about this mentality that says somehow a gun is a solution to anything as far as an individual goes, unless you're obviously living on the land. But I think for the most of us, those times have passed. We don't hunt for food. But that's my personal opinion. And this is coming from a person who knows weapons and knows war and knows violence. And I don't, I hope that I don't get thrown off by people making all kinds of emotional claims about things that they really don't know much about. We have to keep fighting that fight. We have to have a more rational society, and one that's not driven by fear, is my hope. But again, neighborhood watch is a good thing. I just don't want neighborhood gangs that are armed up to protect their borders.
That's the last no card question I had, so we're going to open it up if there are any other questions in the audience. Yeah.
This is a big question. I just want to throw this out. I may have, mentioned this to you before, but if people make these arguments about the Second Amendment, like it's some kind of unlimited right or something like that, and I keep telling people, there's no such thing as unlimited rights. It's called anarchy. I compare the First and the Second Amendment with these folks. If I've done this before, I probably, because I talk to people about this all the time, whoever will listen to me. The First Amendment says, "Power shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech," is very absolute language. And yet, that doesn't give a person the right to yell fire in a crowded theater. This is a classic example. So there's no such thing as an unlimited right. That's anarchy. And if you compare the First and Second Amendments, when the Second Amendment says well-regulated, it has the phrase well-regulated in the amendment. So I don't understand these people that say, oh yeah, I can have any firearm, any place, anything. It's obviously not what the Second Amendment says. Okay, I'm done. I mean, it's so crazy to me that people, I don't know. It's simple. It's really kind of simple.
I do understand the difficulty we have now, at least in the public realm, is that logical arguments don't carry the day. Emotional arguments do.
True.
And images do, more than substance.
Right.
But that's the milieu we live in.
Okay.
Anyway, and I'm glad you came.
So if there are no other questions, obviously our office's contact information is here up on the screen. We should have some half sheets also on the table outside for Representative Walker and Senator Gillespie's offices. Has the same contact info on there, so feel free to take one if you need to get in touch with us at a later date. Otherwise, we have the room for a couple more minutes technically, so the representative and senator will be around. If you want any follow-up comments or conversations, but otherwise, thank you all very much for coming.